the warm and sweet introduction, but take it with a pinch of salt, if not with a sack of salt. So I'm going to be talking about transnational imageries, responsibility and irresponsibility of distance. I do not want to intimidate you with the title, but I will clearly explain. And before I go into, into the issue, I just want to quickly make a theoretical point on diaspora and transnationalism. In the classical diaspora studies, diasporas have been defined and described as a community that lives outside or forced to live outside its so-called homeland. It's a kind of forced migration. It has been classically linked with forced migration because of genocide, because of ethnic cleansing, because of all kinds of other civil wars. Right. So, but what happened afterwards in the contemporary studies on diaspora, the notion of diaspora has become not very theoretically rigorous. All kinds of communities and groups have been categorized as diaspora. For example, thousands of people who migrate from Canada to Florida in the winter, they're snowbirds, they have been considered as a kind of diaspora. And whether you believe it or not, there was a study categorizing American U.S. military in Iraq as a military diaspora. So it has become some kind of a conceptual mess in the study of diaspora studies now. But however, I would like to retain the basic idea that we need to link the diaspora or diaspora studies and diaspora communities with the notion of forced migration. At the same time, we have also kind of transformed or moved beyond that particular notion, classical notion of diaspora, to include various kinds of transnational communities or the transnational practices. So the transnationalism and transnational practices have become some kind of a very useful theoretical and instrumental tool in the study of various communities. And the other point I want you to clearly remember is all the diaspora communities are transnational communities, but not all the transnational communities are diasporic communities. So this is a kind of a larger, broader framework that I'm going to go into. And the context to my current research on responsibility and irresponsibility of distance, it comes as a kind of a point in my past 14 years of personal, political, and academic research. During the peace talks between 2002 and 2004, I developed a concept called the diaspora circulation. Diasporas have been classically affiliated or attributed to the notion of return, that at some point, they would like to return to their quote-unquote homeland, and, was overwhelmingly impressed and inspired by nostalgia. So the notion of return of the diaspora has been a central theme in the diasporic studies. But I argued that the notion of return is not really going to work in many of the instances of diaspora. Rather, we should be thinking about diaspora circulation, that as a kind of opposed to brain drain, that members of the diaspora, Tamil diaspora or the other diaspora, if the situation and context is suitable, they should be able to go back and spend some time there, ethically and morally committed work, whether it could be educational, development, etc., and they should go back. And there should be a kind of a system of circulation that will really enhance the power of the people there and the power of diaspora. So this is the notion of diaspora circulation, which developed in between 2002 and 2006. But after that, while doing that one, I kind of discovered, I wouldn't say discovered, but I kind of researched, it's a very unique phenomenon in the Tamil diasporic communities. That is what we call the transnational social and economic networks. It basically is a transnational social and economic network. Simply means, at least at the last term, in the late 2005-06, there were about more than 200 what we call in sociology HVA, Home Village Associations, and Alumni Association. The Home Village Association is that, mostly, a lot of villages in the northern east, they have association in Toronto, in Montreal, in Australia, in Norway, various parts. So this is what I call the Home Village Association. And you also know about the AA, Alumni Association, with most of the schools in the northern east, they have associations here, right? But this particular phenomenon, it does not exist in any other diasporic communities. Of course, in Latin American countries, there are certain town associations, hometown association, but there's a particular commitment to the particular village and the school, and this particular large network. You are looking at a huge network of organization when you come to HVA and AS, and they have been contributing systematically to their quote-unquote homeland, right? At times of crisis, are supporting the families, and also supporting the liberation struggle, and at times of peace, rebuilding, reconstruction, and all the other issues. So this is a very unique kind of thing, and if we put the money value on the contribution of all these things at view, if you look at the amounts that Canadian government spend in terms of not bilateral cooperation, but in terms of development and humanitarian aid and other aid, the money the Home Village Association, the AA, spend is double the amount. So the detailed information and things are available on my in my book that I displayed it outside there, but one of the books somehow disappeared. So other books will be there in the morning. So that is the most important thing, and the third point is the possibility of alternative forms of governance. What are the possibilities of alternative forms of governance in the context of Tamil diaspora? When I say the alternative forms of governance, I will explain in a minute, but this is not simple traditional way of talking about nation-state governance, global and international. The moment we talk about global or international, we are simply talking about the nation-state. It is overdetermined by the nation-state. But my idea of transnational is completely out of this one. Nations without states, vulnerable communities, and all kinds of almost 300 nations without states and groups here in the world, they do not have representation at any international or so-called global thing. They need to be outside. They need to think about creating something outside. That is what I call the alternative forms of transnational governance. And after that, we produce a report. I produce a research paper on this particular notion of alternative forms of transnational governments, comparing 17 different ethnic groups in Myanmar. They have been demanding different kinds of governance, not just one. It's completely, and in the Aceh province in Indonesia, they have a completely different set of understanding. And to a certain extent in Nepal, Prachanda and his group, they have a different kind of understanding. There are some possibilities, and then I thought about what would be the possibility for the Tamil, and what would be the contribution of Tamil diaspora. So, and finally, based on the thing, I started to look inward of the activities and the Tamil diasporic interaction, political, social, and cultural. Then I'm talking to you about what is the notion of responsibility of distance and the irresponsibility of distance, right? So in order to explain what exactly the idea is, in the traditional understanding of diaspora, when the nation state use it, when Ministry of Foreign Affairs, or the typical standard international understanding is, diasporas are bad because they either, as Sudha explained, historically speaking, the warfare actually, in a sense, evolved a long time ago, and the warfare was between, in the anthropological literature, it was between the nomads and the settlers. Once a community is settled, it doesn't want to accept the nomads because you do not have any faith. We cannot trust you. Historically, the warfare has been between so-called nomads and the settlers. Right. That is why every time we take a passport or a citizenship, we are made to take an oath loyal to the state or loyal to the queen. The loyalty to the nation state and the nation is fundamental necessity for any kind of nation state. but diaspora is out of it, right? So there's a kind of implicit tension and in a sense implicit critique of the whole idea of nationhood, nation state, how we construct it, right? So we need to clearly understand, especially as Tamil, as Tamil community. And then this, the big bad diaspora notion is a very prevalent notion in Sri Lanka, in India. And as you know, most of the official Sri Lankan government are, statements, ideology on diaspora. And the so-called liberal think tanks in Colombo, when they produce, this is the problem in Sri Lanka is solved, but the only problem is the diaspora, right? Some time ago, former Indian Prime Minister Manmohan Singh came to Canada, and he advised then Prime Minister Stephen Harper in public, you've got to be very careful with the Sikh diaspora. Similar kind of advices have been given about Tamils to other political leaders. But Canadian leaders said, well, people here have the right to express even separation in a peaceful way. But it is not just a politician. Immediately after the genocide in May 2009, the famous Indian historian Romila Tharpa went to Colombo. She spoke at the International Center for Ethnic Studies, where she made the same kind of statement that the problem in Sri Lanka is not the problem in Sri Lanka. The problem is the diaspora, right? It is on record. So this is a kind of a typical orthodox cemented understanding of diaspora. Rather, what we should be thinking is the diaspora is not monolithic. There are different phases, there are different groups, there are different kinds of thinking and modes. And there is a tension. And that is where we need to talk about what is responsibility and what is irresponsibility in terms of diaspora. And I quickly want to introduce what I mean by transnational imagery, and then I will conclude by giving you some examples of irresponsibility and responsibility of distance. The transnational, in my case, I use imagination. There is political imagination. There is sociological imagination. There is all kinds of imagination, including poetic imagination. So imagination as a social practice. Imagination is a research practice. Actually, the imagination as social practice comes from Arjuna Padre, because we need new imagination to create science, create social science thinking, create solution. We cannot simply typically, rewrite and say over and again what has been given to us systematically and canonically. We need creative imagination. That is what we call imagination as a social practice, as a sociological practice, as a practice of political science. And second, you may or may not agree with me on this one. I think, and I would suggest, that literary and poetic imagination is much more powerful and advanced than social science imagination, right? It is debatable, but that is my conviction after doing 15 years of university academic work and producing paper. The poetic and literary imagination most of the time can transcend the simple economic and political science imagination. And that is a key point I want to argue in my current research. And thirdly, there are two kinds of transnational practices. One, the transnational practice of, say, like NATO, WTO, European Union, they also call themselves transnational because they operate transnational, right? But that is transnational from above, right? There's another kind of transnational practice and transnationalism practiced by big corporate capitals, all the major corporations. They also claim, transnational CEOs, right? So we cannot simply go after those kind of transnational practices. So what kind of transnationalism and transnational practice that I propose, and I argue, is it should be transnational practice from below. It should be from the refugee communities. It should be from the communities that are vulnerable. It should be from communities of resistance. This is actually yes, Yohanandan's term. We are not just the diasporic community, we are communities of resistance. The transnational practice of communities of resistance is a kind of transnationalism we need to be talking about, right? So any transnational practice that goes and support any kind of corporate project will not be suitable, will not give us any kind of salvation. This is the key point I want to argue. And secondly, as long as we follow this typical nation-state model, and as long as we put all our eggs in that basket, we will not be having any kind of new creative version for our alternative forms of government, right? That is one of the reasons why, as a diasporic committee, as a transnational community, we have so much power, we have so much resources, and we have so much space to think about new ways of creating transnational institution. And that also takes us to another one, right? You know, we keep on going back to UN, United Nations, United rights, and transnational justice. Within the current system, it won't work, right? Because there is no space for us to argue. So we need to be working in solidarity with all the other committees of resistance and create an alternative form of accountability, right? You could say it is an ideal. You could say it is going to be too much. I do not deny the fact that currently, you know, we are forced to work with them. Okay, we work with them, but we need to go beyond that one, right? You know, never expect any kind of reasonable justice from the existing international institution, including the UN. UN and UDHR, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, is completely old. It doesn't mean anything to us anymore because everyone is taking selectively and using it. Look at the United States. So we should not be putting too much emphasis on this particular system. We need to go beyond that one, right? And finally, this is my counterpoint, right? You know what I said in the transnational politics of diaspora committees and resistance committees should not simply follow the old pattern, right? And so what is the idea of irresponsibility and responsibility of distance, right? I'm using the term responsibility and responsibility not in the sense of material responsibility. I'm using the term responsibility in an ethical manner. You know, an ethical manner means that we need to acknowledge who we are, what sort of privileges we have as members of diaspora, right? And now what happens? Let's take the politics of responsibility. There are about 5 points that I would like to quickly mention. Some of the elements of politics of responsibility. One, solidarity. It's a kind of a transnational solidarity. We should be working in solidarity with our sisters and brothers, mothers, fathers, relations, everyone in the northern east of Sri Lanka. Notion of solidarity, that is one. And two, in a similar fashion, we should be working in solidarity with the Sinhalese progressive people and the Muslim progressive people and the Kurdish people and all the other communities of resistance. We cannot simply confine. This morning there was a photograph in the Toronto Star. The Kurdish Canadian community was protesting about the bombings in Afrin, right? There was not a single non-Kurdish Canadian in that photograph, right? I checked with the organizers. No, not very many people came. So there was the kind of solidarity I mean is not just between us, also between the others. And second, the notion of agency. That is the most important thing of the politics of responsibility. We cannot simply deny the agency of the people that live in the Northern East. We cannot simply say, we are in diaspora, we send you money, so we can dictate to you. While we understand that we are inseparably part of an intricate thing, but the moral responsibility is not to dictate them, right? So that is the idea of solidarity. But in the past, and even now, I know organizations, I know media organizations, the newspapers, they have the courage, the kind of idiotic courage to dictate this is what they should be doing. We can discuss. We cannot appropriate their voices. We cannot speak for them, but we can speak next to them. That is the idea of solidarity and the politics of responsibility, right? And that is the only political way that we can create some sort of political network and working relationship without compromising the notion of solidarity. And I'll give you some examples, one or two examples of politics of responsibility, then I will conclude. After after the genocide, there is this myth that everything has become normal there in Jaffna and the East. People are going and backing, right? It is not just diaspora return, but it's diaspora tourism, right? Diaspora tourism has become a very big, very powerful industry. And people have been, some organizations, some groups, some people with a lot of money, they go and invest, right? What kind of ethical investment we need to think about? We have huge organizations. We have huge business. I'm not against investment, but I would like all of us to think about what kind of an ethical investment can be done, how we can do this one without any kind of compromising with the genocidal state. Have you ever thought about it? This is the most important thing, right? I understand that we need to support, we need to contribute, and we need to build them economically. The notion of development is necessary, even with whatever critique is. But we cannot simply take the money and go and invest and building tourism without knowing the politics of it. So this is one of the reasons why I insist that agency is important. People who work there, people who live there, and what sort of a thing, right? And finally, it is a bit difficult to operationalize all these ideas that I have just said, but we have no other way. And I would like to end with a quote. This quote is not my quote. This is the quote from the famous great Russian writer Dostoevsky, and it comes from his brother Karamazov. We are all responsible for everyone else. We are all responsible for everyone else, but I am more responsible than all the others. So that is the spirit of solidarity, and that is the spirit of responsibility that we in the diaspora may follow. Thank you.